Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through our 2 graduate programs, a long-standing MS in Global Affairs, and a recently launched MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as these that expand upon the topics that we cover in our classroom. We are also very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising. Through our open enrollment courses and certificate in fundraising and new certificate in digital fundraising programs, we offer professionally oriented educational options for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast expertise, experience, and networks to the classroom. You'll hear from one of those faculty members today, Liz Nganzi. We'll send out a follow-up message to all attendees, so please do feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. We've also reserved some time at the end of today's program for questions from the audience, so please feel free to send your questions via the Q&A tool. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Bianca Derouene, moderator for today's panel and president and founder of Aperio Philanthropy, our event partners for this series. The virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you all today. As Michelle said, I'm president and founder of Aperio Philanthropy. We are a fundraising consulting firm that specializes in hands-on support for relationship-based fundraising. We work with organizations, large and small, across the country on the central question of how do we raise revenue for our missions more predictably and more sustainably and more efficiently. We're really thrilled to be talking about the topic of storytelling today, and specifically the topic of storytelling in the context of driving bold community-centric change. Almost every day I hear from nonprofit leaders and fundraisers something along the lines of, I don't want to go back to the way things were before the pandemic. Throughout the past year, through crisis, through racial justice reckonings and awakenings, we've learned so much about our purpose and our potential and our values. And it's starting to be important that we not just survive and come out of crisis, but apply everything that we've learned to our daily lives and our daily work in fundraising. The question is, of course, how do we do that and what does it look like? I'm thrilled that today we have a panel of nonprofit leaders and experts who are going to talk to just that. What does it look like to not just dream differently and think differently, but also do differently? We're going to focus on how we tell the stories of our organization's purpose, mission, and work, how we bring to life the impact and importance of that work to our communities and our donor audience. And most importantly, whose stories are we telling and how are we centering the right people in the right ways at the right time? How are we telling those stories in a way that is authentic and honoring and compelling? And how do we differentiate ourselves and stand out in the noise of our world today? These themes today are going to be discussed by our distinguished panel, who we'll introduce now so we can get the conversation started. First, we have Anthony Escobar, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Development Officer at the YMCA of Greater New York, where he provides leadership of all fundraising initiatives and activities tailored to engaging the YMCA's individual, corporate, and foundation donors. Anthony previously spent more than 20 years as a fundraising professional at universities and nonprofit organizations in New York and Los Angeles. Ymca Carmo is founder and CEO of the Tiger Lily Foundation, where under her leadership, they have launched national and global health initiatives focused on ending disparities through the Inclusion Pledge, partnering with global stakeholders with a call to action to recognize health disparities as a social justice issue, and working to end disparities for Black women in our lifetime. Liz Nganzi is founder and CEO of the International Social Impact Institute, where she utilizes her skills as an international educator, social entrepreneur, and speaker, and is helping purpose-driven leaders and organizations worldwide to clarify, develop, and share their stories in order to increase their impact. As Michelle said, she also teaches at the NYU program. So without further ado, I'd love to get the conversation started, and I'm going to ask the panelists to join us here on the screen. If you want to show your faces, welcome everybody. So before we dive into storytelling, I think it'll be important for us to talk a little bit about context. And so I'm going to ask each of you to share, how has your organization or the organizations you work with been impacted by the past year? How are you thinking differently? How are you working differently? What questions have come up for you? And to get the conversation started, I'm going to ask you, Liz, to speak to your own experiences and the organizations that you work with.
Okay. Thank you, Bianca and Michelle, for providing this opportunity. And hello, everybody. I have to tell you, these last 18 months have been obviously very, very stressful, but they've also been really great in terms of helping to create that clarity of vision and purpose. I went through that, fairly early on in the year in 2020, having just for lots of different personal reasons. But one of the things I realized is that I've been working tirelessly at NYU for over 10 years, trying to get organizations to understand how important it is to be able to tell their stories online, to be able to leverage such online platforms to raise funds and so on and so forth. And what I did probably sort of middle of March was really start using LinkedIn Live to develop different talks for nonprofit organizations that I knew undoubtedly were going through a lot of stress, trying to understand how to adapt to this new virtual world, how to move their events online, and so on and so forth. And so for me, it was really understanding that if I could help organizations understand how to leverage technology more effectively to tell their stories, that was going to make a very big difference. The other thing I also recognize is that organizations tend to really think about when they're telling their stories, they focus on the problem that they're trying to solve. They focus on the solution, but really what they need to be looking at is the impact that they're creating and how the prospective supporter they want to connect with is going to be able to help them realize that mission. And so helping organizations to understand how to do that has been really very important for me. To being able to do that, whether it be through the International Social Impact Institute with organizations around the world, as well as here domestically in communities of color and other sort of marginalized communities. So that's been really important, as well as through my course here at NYU, Digital Storytelling, Innovation, and Fundraising. So really helping organizations to get clear about how to leverage technology to tell their stories, and then using a really effective framework for doing so. But ultimately, if you as a leader are not clear about why you're working for your organization, what your own purpose is, it's going to be very hard for you to convince the supporter to be able to come on board. So really helping organizations to go inward, the leaders go inward and have a clear understanding what their purpose is and how that aligns with the organization they work for, and then essentially how that also aligns with the supporter they're trying to engage.
Thank you, Liz. And I completely agree with you that this has been an 18 months of rediscovering purpose and becoming very clear as leaders and as fundraisers on what that looks like. And that's the first step to telling our story more effectively, as you say. Anthony, I think this is probably a good segue to you. How was the YMCA of Greater New York affected by the pandemic? I'm smiling because I know the answer is a lot.
Yes, in a nutshell, it was a lot. The YMCA of Greater New York is a large social services organization. We have been part of the fabric of New York City for about 170 years, and we serve about 500,000 New Yorkers each year in a variety of ways. And seemingly overnight, all of our services ceased, at least temporarily. And what that meant was that all of our revenue sources, and we do have multiple revenue sources, not just philanthropy, but fee for service and earned income, government contracts, and so forth, a lot of that was impacted to the tune of about $100 million. That was a $100 million revenue loss that we experienced over the past year at the end of 2020. So we were all of a sudden overnight half of the organization that we anticipated to be. And what that meant for the organization was the scaling back in multiple ways, having to make some very hard decisions, including furloughs and eventual layoffs. But ultimately what that meant in terms of our impact on the city was that we had to scale back on so many of the services that we provide each day that many New Yorkers across all 5 boroughs come to rely on. And that was very, very tough because when you work for the Y, most people are just so mission oriented in terms of serving communities. And we didn't want that to stop. So it forced us to think more creatively, how to do more with less. And for fundraising in particular, our team was cut in half. And we knew that with a lot of the COVID response that was taking place out in the city, we had to think, well, where's our place in that? And how do we communicate that out to our constituencies? Of course, people, during a crisis like a pandemic, you're thinking of the frontline response. You're thinking about the healthcare workers who are in the hospitals treating patients. You're thinking about people who need food and certain services like that. And in many ways, I think that the Y was flexible enough to pivot, to be part of what I would consider a second response team. By expanding our transitional housing program to take in more people who were experiencing homelessness, providing childcare for frontline healthcare workers. And then eventually down the road, we started also offering food pantries in 3 of our vulnerable communities for people experiencing food insecurities. So there were many ways in which we were trying to rethink how we provide our social services, the types of services that we provide, and what could we do in addition to our core signature programs that we deploy. And all that to say, the last thing that I'll say in terms of messaging and fundraising is that I think when we took a step back and we looked at our mission work, we realized that for 170 years, how critical the Y is to the daily lives of so many, and that everything that we do is for the city. And so if anything, it increased this feeling of solidarity for us with all New Yorkers and our connectedness to the city. So we in fact kind of tailored our messaging around that. The campaign that we launched was called the Campaign for New York City, as opposed to something like the Campaign for the Y. That we wanted to message that we would continue to play a vital role in the recovery and the rebuilding of the city to help us get through this crisis period. So
it's a really powerful story. I can't wait to hear more about where you're going next. Before we go a little deeper into storytelling, Mayma, how was your organization affected by the past 18 months?
It's been really interesting. When I began Tiger Lily, I was 31 years old, going through breast cancer, and began it as a single mother in my bed while in the middle of treatment. I didn't have time for a support group. I didn't have time to go apply for grants. I was working full time in treatment fully. First generation immigrant, working, taking care of my daughter. And so a lot of what I wanted for resources were not available to me because of my, working full time, being a parent, not knowing where to go, or being turned down because people were giving either adults who had cancer or children who had cancer more supportive services. So what we built was a virtual space for women who are young adult breast cancer survivors, younger adult and women of color to come to for support. When you're parenting and full-time jobbing and paying the bills and, cleaning the house, all things that you do as a young parent, you don't have time for cancer, right? But it's there. So we built this virtual hub for our patients, providing resources, financial assistance, meal delivery, patient advocacy training and toolkits. But the hard part for me was kind of like we got a lot of media attention, but we weren't getting financial support. And it really bothered me that I would hear someone giving a group $100 million or $50 million, and I'm begging for $1,000. And I'm a Black woman. Black women have a 40% higher death rate than their white counterparts. And we have cancers that are untreatable because of the lack of targeted treatment. Yet someone's throwing money at other orgs and we're like dying at higher rates. So that really was hard for me as a single parent, single leader organization with no staff and self-funding it myself for almost 10 years. revenue for probably for about 12 years under, I'm sorry, 13 years under 250 a year. Before that, it was half of that. And before that, I was funding it myself while working a full-time job and doing government contracting on the side to make money to pay myself and to fund the organization. And so, I hear people talking about health disparities and the importance of hearing Black people's voices. And yet I'm one of the, most prominent women, the voices in DC and across the country, been on Oprah, all of that. And I'm like struggling for funding. When COVID happened and the murder of George Floyd happened, something happened that was indescribably painful for us all to watch. But what it did was shine a light on the fact that people talk about this stuff a lot, but don't give it enough attention, support, and investment. Groups like mine are on the ground talking to patients who are younger, who are dying faster, women of color who are not able to get access to treatments, to screenings, to offer clinical trials. And because of that missed appointment or lack of money to travel or babysitting money, could die for just literally one small amount of bucket of funding. And so while the pandemic was painful for many people, including our patients, it also showed people who were funding other groups, like, look at what they're doing and who's going to them for support. And before last year, I was ready to give up. I thought, I've been working for 14 years, 2 jobs in being a parent, and no one's seeing me. All of a sudden, the entire world seeing the disparities that exist in health equity around the country and around the world. For us, our revenue went up over 1,000% because people saw that people die for this very reason as organizations that are helping those who are facing inequities and the communities who are facing inequities, because no one's seeing you, because they're just not noticing that you're doing the work, and they're giving money to those who have a big PR budget or a bigger staff. And you can't do the work without staff, right? And you can't do it without money for overhead. And so I really also got bold. I became the fire. I kind of would always say to people, like, when something happens, you have to walk through the fire. But I'm like, I have to become people are dying of this disease. And I'm sitting here being not passive, but being angry. It's not going to help me by just being angry or just saying, you know what, I'm tired of this. How am I going to demand justice? Which means you have to give my patients what they deserve. So I began to speak about these women's stories, talk about women who are going through breast cancer, who are dying because of missed appointments, mistreatments, not being offered certain things. And the storytelling I would begin to talk about was a more powerful story, not just one of empowerment or of education, but the fact is that people were accountable to us to support the work that we're doing. And the way I told the story became different. The passion, the passion and the and the fact that someone had to die on camera for the world to see that this was wrong. That's what bothered me. I think that stood a fire in me that pushed me to tell my story in a way that was more palpable, more in your face, more you will look at me and you will see me. And we told people that you're accountable to support our work, or else we are going to die as an organization and as Black women. And so for us, the pandemic was tough for patients to not get what they needed in some ways, but because of the way we told the story, we got more funding. We're able to actually grow the programmatic work, grow the staff, and at the end of the day, do the most important work, help patients to get access to treatments in a way that's timely and more effective, giving women who are of color better access to important treatments. So it's really interesting how it changed for us. And so we had our women of color get out there, because also, when women are telling their stories, if a man's telling a story and he's angry, he's passionate. Woman's telling her story and she's angry, then she's being a B word. I said, I don't care. People are dying. I don't give a rat's ass. Sorry, and so we told our patients, tell your stories. And so we had these women of color on platforms that were huge, telling their stories in a way that was unapologetic, not asking for making an excuse, and just saying, you have to do this. This is what's right, what's equitable, what's just, and what's true. And that storytelling really transformed our foundation. It transformed how we did business, and ultimately transformed the fact that we're still viable more than ever, more than we have been in the past 15 years.
Thank you for sharing, and what a powerful story in and of itself. And I think there's a lot to dig into there, and we're looking forward to asking you some follow-up questions. And I think what's so striking as all 3 of you were speaking is how storytelling is who we are. It is what we do. There's no way to separate out working for a nonprofit and storytelling, or fundraising and storytelling, or being human in storytelling. And I think it is such a powerful tool that we have in our arsenal to drive change and to drive visibility and to drive progress, like you're saying, Mayma. So Liz, back to you. You mentioned before, you started going down this road already, so I want to give you a chance to give us Liz's
But I'm excited about what Mayma said. I want to jump on that, but let's go ahead.
Okay, jump on that, and then also tell us, what do you wish everybody knew about storytelling?
I'm going to
piggyback on both of those.
So something that Mayma said that really resonated with me, and I think so many times as organizations, even as people, we fail to do, is ask for what we want and tell people what we want them to do. In fact, whenever I teach here at NYU, we did this on Monday, and this morning I was coaching women in Ethiopia for 4 hours. We're going through this, and I was saying, when you look at your materials, if you look at your social media posts, you go to your website, you don't actually ask anybody to do anything. You spend all this time creating these wonderful videos, you have all this great content, but what do you want people to do? So I just wish, just that one thing, tell people what you want them to do, make that ask. So it's like, if you don't do that, then you've really wasted your time. And it sounds like what my Mayma did was really kind of rev up that ask, and that's why she was able to get that response. And clearly the timing was right and so on and so forth. But I think she said, I was unapologetic. I just went out there and I just, just kept saying, you need to support us. We need this. And that's it, that call to action. So that's really what I wish is organizations would be more willing to do that. And I'd also say to you that a lot of times, just depending on the culture, we don't feel like we should be asking, right? That's because it's also our relationship with money, it's our relationship with a lot of different things. And so we sort of kind of softly go through all this stuff. But the bottom line is that when you're in the work that we're in, when you're delivering service that's important in many instances saves people's lives, you have to be willing to ask for what you need. Otherwise, you might as well be doing something completely different. So that's what I would say is really get that call to action together.
I love that. And I always start all of our fundraising trainings with, let's step back and remember that fundraising is not stealing people's wallets. We are giving them an opportunity to do something that they already want to do. And so not asking for favors, right? Mayma's not pocketing the money that's coming into her foundation. It's for a purpose, and the donor shares that purpose, and they want to do the action, right?
Yes.
I want to say that people don't understand that nonprofits are businesses too. Yes. Right. I mean, one of the things, I'll be totally honest, they'll say, well, we don't want to fund overhead operations. How in the heck can you be subsisting without paying people or paying for the computer you're on or the technology to run your platform? So I challenged my partners. I said, I can't run this global organization, national or community-based, if I can't afford staff, computers, technology, Facebook boosting. You have to give me money for things. So, why pay a CEO of a company $1 million or 250 or 500, whatever it is, and you give the nonprofit CEO what, then she has to work for free or he has to work for free. So I challenge people on that. And I looked at the top companies in the country, in the world, what they're paying people, even some of the top nonprofits. You have to support your staff, meaning they have to get salaried money to be able to subsist. So I just challenge those who are looking at this, they think about how you value those who work for you, for your community. I worked for free for 14.5 years. No one does that for free for that long. I mean, but why should we have to, right? When you're giving your time and your heart and your life to the work that matters for people. So sorry, Anthony, it's your turn. I had to interject.
I wanted to add one more thing, sir, before we go to that. Go there, because Bianca, you brought this up. Alignment. Before you start communicating, you need to understand what it is that your audience is looking for, right? So if it's a supporter, you have to understand what's important to your supporters. You need to, so that when you're sharing your story, whether it be in person, it's a proposal or whatever it may be, you have to understand your audience. And so you can make that connection between your mission, what you're doing, and what their interests are. Because if you don't have that alignment, then you're like begging, right? Then you're like really, you're doing the wrong thing. Because again, Bianca, you mentioned you're creating an opportunity that the supporters are already interested in, right? You're helping to further their interests by having them work with you. And so it's really shifting that thinking and creating that alignment. That's what I wanted to leave you with. And Anthony, it's your turn.
Well, with that, Anthony, I guess,
No
you
worries.
know, would love your overall storytelling tips. But, you know, I've been thinking a little bit about this topic of visibility that Mema mentioned. And I know the Y is such a big brand. And from personal experience working at the Red Cross, I think sometimes that has its own invisibility as well, because everyone knows your brand, but nobody knows what you do. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you're telling your story differently now to really bring forward what it is you do, but also integrate everything that you mentioned before that you'd learned during the pandemic.
Sure. Well, I think you just hit the nail right on the head. You know, I will admit that when I was moving back from Los Angeles to New York City, and I was meeting with our CEO at the Y about this position, that was the first time that I learned all the things that the Y does. And I think that like so many others out in New York City and across the country, people think they know what the Y is all about. But really that's been limited, I think, in many instances to our gym program. So we are a fitness facility. We offer swimming classes. I think many people have learned how to swim at the Y, and that's about it. And so when you see the Y, you think you know what the Y is all about. During a 65-minute conversation with my CEO about the Chief Development Officer role, I learned that we did a lot of K-12 programming. We've had immigration services for the past century here in New York City. We do transitional housing, not just offering hotel guest rooms, but actual transitional housing services. We offer a variety of health programs. So, you know, it really opened my eyes in terms of how complex the Y is, but therein lies the problem. Because the Y is such a legacy brand that people can often overlook it to say, oh, I already know what the Y is. I don't need to take a second look at what you're doing. Why do I need to? I know what it is. And our ubiquitous nature also lends itself to that. You know, there's a Y, people think that there's a Y everywhere. And in fact, we have 24 branches across New York City. So shortly after I came, I realized that I think our messaging wasn't sticking. Competing against the gym brand of our organization was you know, kind of like a fruitless endeavor. People know that about the Y, don't fight it. And so what I started advocating for early on, which is now about to come to fruition this fall, was to say, well, let's not compete with the gym aspect. That brings in a tremendous amount of revenue. People love the Y for that. There's so many children's classes that are offered, the swim classes, the basketball and all of that stuff. Let's not compete with that. But what we might need to consider doing is sub-branding or creating a new, entirely different organizational structure that allows us to focus the community programs that we also offer. And so this fall, what we're actually doing is launching a new organizational structure called the Center for Access, Innovation, and Advocacy that will house all of the community programs that the Y deploys each day. But more importantly, it's actually going to give us a new purpose in terms of how to rethink and reimagine those programs, assess their effectiveness, give us space to try to innovate and create better solutions that are scalable. So I think it's going to push us in new directions. And I will just say that in college, I was a lit major, right? And so I love stories. But with those stories, I love a central theme, or I love centralized themes, right? And so I think what this new structure and organization is going to be able to, for the Y to do, is to finally focus its messaging in a more clear and concise way of what it is we're actually doing and why it is that we're doing what that is. And for it's still a work in progress, but I would say that it centers around our belief that human development is core to creating more flourishing communities and achieving more equity. So that is kind of where we are. We haven't officially launched it yet this fall, but everything from that umbrella theme is going to then, all the stories that we tell are going to start stemming from that centralized theme. And I think it's going to give people something new and quite possibly exciting to look at for the Y, which is something hard to do when you're 170 years old. So.
Right. Thank you. Well, and I love the, starting with Liz's advice of figure out what it is that you want donors to actually do. Start there, and then talk about how do we tell our story in a way that feels coherent, building towards that call to action. And then Mayma, I'm going to ask you to pick up a little bit where you started, which is then how do you make it personal for the people who are listening? How do you build that emotional resonance? And I know from our prior conversations that you use personal stories, whether they're your own or the stories of the people that you meet, to really cement how vital your work is. Tell us a little bit more about how you decide when to use those stories, how you use those stories, and what role you think they play in this broader topic of sort of making a case for support.
Yeah, so I think what I try to do is, when I'm creating a storytelling, I close my eyes and I imagine the person who's watching what I'm putting out there. That person's heart's beating, that person is breathing, that person feels, right? How do I want them to feel when their eyes see what I'm putting out there on social media? So do I want them to scroll or want them to just stop and go, oh my God? So every moment that whatever we put out there is, it's like a symphony, right? They're gonna see the video and then they're gonna have to get pulled in slowly. And they're gonna go, oh, I'm bored. Well, no, what really? And then they're gonna they feel that person's energy, right? So like we're putting out a series about patients who are metastatic. And for many years, all you hear about breast cancer is pink stuff and 3-day walks, right? And if you ask the average person what happens to people with breast cancer, they think there's just one kind of breast cancer. And then most people survive it, and then the money goes towards research. What kind of research? Who's at the PI in the lab? Where's the money going to? Is it going to triple negative, early stage, HER2, like MBC patients? Like, what is it going towards? People have been hypnotized. They've been hypnotized into just kind of saying yes to not knowing. So my job is to make people wake up and ask questions. So the series we're doing is about people's life being their legacy, but it's on patients who are metastatic, who are going to die of stage 4 breast cancer, but they're living their life, right? So we began showing a woman living her life, on her farm, in her tractor, feeding her chickens, talking to her husband, giving him a kiss. And then you see her doing that, and she's beautiful and she's vibrant. And then she sits down and says, my name is Shantae, and I have stage 4 breast cancer. And I have maybe X amount of years to live, but I don't know. And here's how I live my life as a legacy. So we really pull people into the person's story, and we tell the truth as well, because what we've been told, in a sense, hasn't always been the truth. I mean, especially with women of color, like my friend Shantae, who has stage 4 breast cancer. She didn't talk about the fact that she went to her doctor 6 years before with the issue, and then she was dismissed by the system. She had irritable breast, ducts, a cyst, and they kept dismissing her until she came back, and they said, come back if it gets hard. And she finally went back after 6 years over and over again with a bloody nipple. And it's when they finally gave her the test she was asking for 6 years. And she's a nurse. And then they found out it was stage 4 breast cancer. And so I said, tell people that, tell them that story, not just the story of you having breast cancer and being metastatic and that you're a warrior and you're pushing through, but how is it that someone goes to a doctor and gets dismissed for 6 years, who's beautiful and vibrant, has great curly hair and great way of talking, and has her own farm, and she's living her best life and just married the love of her life, and her life is just, blooming and growing, and then she's thinking, okay, doctor's right, and then doctor's wrong. And the patients who are stage 4, the average expectancy is 18 months to 3 years. So now her life is going to be potentially cut short. So we talk about that, but then how they're living their lives and how you can, why knowing that's important to you as a patient, as a woman who's young and healthy, or who's an early stage patient, or who's a mom or a dad, or who's a grant writer or a funder. So the way we tell stories is people are pulled into the true story of what's happening. Like last year, one of my best friends died during COVID, during the shutdown, the week of the shutdown. And so, how do I help people understand the importance of getting their screenings? I tell my pain to the world, that one of my best friends died and I told her goodbye via FaceTime. And if you stop getting your screenings, even during COVID, that could be your story as well in the next 18 months to a year or 2 years. And so we really tell stories in a way that make people lean in and draw into us, and feel our passion. But we talk about being alive too, right? We talk about the importance of me being, somebody who is running a national organization now and being a parent. I have a series that I put on Instagram called Self-Love with Ymca, talking about how I love myself every day by meditating and working out and being a good mom and, being out with friends. And how do you create a life that you love? So it's really, for me, multifaceted, is giving people what they need to hear to understand what what to do with what you're telling them. But to a point that Liz made, you don't have to beg. If you're begging, you're doing the wrong thing. This work we're doing, that Anthony's doing, that Liz is doing, it has a lot of value. Show your value, and you don't have to beg for money. And we tell people, use your privilege for power. Your privilege is that you have a job. You may have 10 cents to give, $1 to give. Your time, the privilege is that you're alive and you're breathing. Give back. And if you could give back in one way, just using that power of what we call the power of one, that's our theme this year, the power of one person, you can change the world. When I began Tiger Lily, I was a single mother. According to some people I knew, a statistic, single Black mother laying in bed with cancer that was untreatable. That was it could have been my story, right? Beginning, end, and that's it. But it was just beginning. And so I told people a new story of how that me being that woman in that bed, I'm going to thrive. I'm going to use my challenge as a gift for other people. And so just talking about your truth and sharing that truth and being passionate about it is so important. And I would say last but not least, you don't have to be perfect. I didn't grow up, I'm not a natural communicator. I'm actually very shy. I'm very much of an introvert. I would get drop dead nervous when I pass out in public when I was speaking. But this work, as you can tell, means so much to me that I would just say to God, let me just speak my truth. And so we teach our patients to speak their truth and to share that. Someone needs to hear that story. The donors need to hear it. People who are watching need to hear it. And if each person does and lives their power of one, we can transform the world through storytelling to impact our fundraising. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. And I think there are a lot of people on this webinar who disagree with, I'm not a natural communicator. You are a really powerful storyteller. Thank you, Ymca. Liz, sort of building on this theme of using personal stories, of course, gets us to one of the darker sides of our profession and how we have appropriated other people's stories and used it in ways that have really reinforced some pretty, really reinforced systemic racism, and particularly in the international fundraising space and in things like poverty porn and all the ways we communicate. So
you're in my head.
as we're getting to some more frank conversations of, okay, time to stop doing this, let's shift. Talk to us about what you think the change is, what's the problem, what's the change that needs to happen, and what can the folks on this webinar do about it?
Anybody who knows me, has taken a course with me, has had a conversation with me, knows I hate poverty porn. Hate. It's like the thing that that really bothers me the most. And whether it's here in the US or in developing countries. And I feel like it's actually kind of, in my personal opinion, it is kind of lazy if that's what you rely on to tell the story. Because it's very exploitative. It's definitely not in any way, it's not empowering of the people who you claim to be serving. And so I really believe that it's important for us to focus on the impact you're trying to make through your organization and what that person or that community will look like as a result of whatever intervention you're providing. And so I think it's really important. I'll give a specific example. I previously served as the US CEO of a South African nonprofit organization that has similar profile to the Y here in the US in some elements of the Y. And I remember, when I took over, I looked at all our communications and I said, well, I really want us to be able to focus on the stories of the young people. I wanted to show that even though these kids are living in these really horrific, kind of environments, they come to the community centers that we provide where they're clearly loved. It's a safe haven, and even in the communities, it's a safe haven, period. And so that's what I wanted to focus on. And I wanted to learn about what their aspirations were. We even created a campaign called Future Leaders on LinkedIn with McCann World Group. And I remember having a board member saying to me, but you always show these kids smiling and they're having a good time, or they're looking all this great, living their best life, as Mema was saying. He's like, but when I was there, I saw kids eating out of garbage. And I think that's what my funders want, my friends who are going to fund are going to want to fund. And I said, well, then they're not going to fund us. And you have to take a stand is kind of what I'm trying to say, because we have to understand, are we in this to help and to be part of helping communities to thrive? Or are we there to be saviors and then somehow gratify our own egos, and really don't really care about these communities that we're serving? And so it really does require us to go inward and really think hard about what we're doing. Now, I'm not saying there aren't funders who aren't going to fund that way, right? I'm not saying that that doesn't work, because it has worked, right? I'm just saying that given what we've learned over the last year, 18 months with COVID and everything, where I really believe in some ways it's brought us closer together because we're all fighting the same enemy, which is COVID-19, right? So all of these things that separate us, all these artificial barriers that have been created to separate us, have now we've now been able to see each other's humanity. And I would even go further to say, you're in my house, right? I mean, you're in your house. In the past, we wouldn't have had that, but now with COVID and being online, we're getting to see a glimpse into people's homes. So we have an opportunity to really learn about who people are and to connect with them on a different level. So I feel that it helps us now to even think about how we want to rewrite our stories, retell the stories of the work we're doing, and really focus on that impact. And it forces us to really think about why we're doing what we're doing, and are we solving the right problems? Or the solution we're coming up with, are they the right solutions to those problems? And what is eventually going to happen? So those are the things I think about. And I feel that that's what I'm teaching, that's what I'm coaching on, to help organizations have that clarity. Like I mentioned, I'm actually currently training and coaching 4 women's associations in East Africa. And, and we're working on rewriting the missions and all that. And I'm like, let's get really clear. What are you doing here? And let's look at the value you add. Let's not be about, oh, well, it's because we're women that we need to be about gender inclusivity. That's important. But you know what? But having more women in the boardroom, having more women in workplaces helps with profitability, helps with innovation, so on and so on. Let's focus on that. Let's get to that point. So that's what I really am all about. And I feel that that's what we've learned, hopefully, from these last 18 months.
Thanks, Liz. Anthony, going to give you an opportunity to build on that, and maybe you can speak to when you're in an organization, sort of practically speaking, and you see the need to make the shift to more community-centric communications and storytelling. How do you do that? What are you working on?
Sure.
Sorry, an easy question for you.
Well, it's an ongoing journey, right? I think for many organizations, continuing to refine this storytelling process. One thing I think that we're very hyper-focused on right now is making our community members a part of our ongoing process. So I don't like to play guessing games. And I think that there's a lot of guessing games that happen sometimes in fundraising. We think we know what the donors want or are interested in. And my team has certainly heard me over the past several months complaining that sometimes our messaging feels like, and our storytelling feels like, we're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And if we're really going to be community-centric, then we need to provide a space for the people that we are serving and that we're trying to engage with, a space for them to have a seat at the table and to express those interests. And so there are some practical ways in which we try to do that. One is that I'm very much pushing our individual giving team to reach out to donors who are loyal to us and ask them, what is it about the why that interests you, and why are you giving right now? We are going to attempt to do that more in mass by providing a way for people to give us feedback in more real time when they're making their gift. What's inspiring this? What else would you like to learn about? To just get a little bit more information in terms of their interests. Also, what's top of mind for them? Because we serve, communities in various ways. What are the issues that you're currently facing? What should we be aware of? Is it childcare? Is it job security or things of that nature? We want to start collecting that information. And so that's just one way, is that quite simply, if you're going to be community-centric, well, then the community has to have a seat at your table, right? The second thing, which I've been concerned about for many, many years, and I've worked at big universities, Cornell, NYU, UCLA, and this topic emerges quite often, but you start to think about whether or not your philanthropy is actually reflective of the communities that you serve. And so about a year ago, I actually asked our data team, can you pull some data on who's giving to us? And I know that not everyone provides us with, say, their racial and ethnic backgrounds and their income levels and so on and so forth, but just give me whatever you can give me. And not surprisingly, overwhelmingly, the information that they were able to provide showed that most of our donors are white. But yet, when you look at the communities that we serve, we are much more heavily BIPOC communities that we are serving. And really, I think what more nonprofits need to embrace and understand as a starting point is that not a single message does not fit all. So that's the first thing, right? I think when you take Liz's course and many of the other strategic communications courses, you already start to understand that you got to segment, right? You got to find the people for this particular story and communicate it to them, because, you know, I may be interested in theater, let's just say, for instance, but Liz might not be interested in theater. And so why would you send her a message regarding theater? So just a couple of weeks ago, I've been thinking about how could we create at the Y a more inclusive culture of philanthropy, right? And there's one practical way, at least, that we can have a little bit more control over. I haven't instituted this yet with my team, but I'm thinking about how organizations these days are mandating trainings in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so you take that and it's all of a sudden a checklist of, like you check that off the box. And then for professional development for fundraisers, you go off and you learn something like how to improve my major gift techniques. Well, what happened to the diversity, equity, and inclusion part of that equation? And so I think what I would like to start instituting here at the Y and wherever I may end up later on is that part of your professional development ongoing and not just a one-time checklist of things is to take more cultural training. How is it to engage the African American community? How do you engage Asian American donors or indigenous peoples? There are nuances to each of those things, and each of them has different ways to engage, the different stories that are going to resonate with them. So I think being more community-centric certainly starts with us and how we can open up ourselves to greater understanding. So I think that is something that literally in the last couple of weeks that I said, I'm always pushing for professional development, but now I got to add a dimension to that to say, I need to mandate this for all of us, that we need to heighten our education and awareness in terms of engaging different types of communities.
It's also competitive. It's also a competitive advantage.
Yes.
Because everyone's targeting the same donor.
Right. That's exactly.
So you got to look. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
To think about that too, and it's representative of the community you serve anyway.
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about how do we broaden our aperture of what is a donor and what is a donor relationship. It doesn't all have to look the same. And I think we have a lot of assumptions that hold us back in that space. Well, we seem to have lost a panelist due to technical difficulties. So I just wanted to acknowledge that in case the audience is like, where did she go? But we're gonna plow ahead and start talking a little bit with our audience here, who have started putting some questions into the chat. I'm going to start with Nan, who says, I agree about storytelling and being honest, but there are many organizations serving the same need. How can we work together? They seem to shy away from that. I'm assuming collaboration because of funding needs. Liz, I'm going to let you answer this one because I know you work with a lot of organizations and networks. What do you think is the art of the possible with collaborating?
You got to understand what the other organization's interests are. What are the, you know what the fears are, right? Is that you're going to take funding away from them. But if we also understand what their interests are, what they bring to the table versus what you bring to the table, then you can try to find a middle point. And let me give you an example. In 2000, and I want to say 9, 10, we work with some boys and girls clubs in northern New Jersey, and each of them really needed to raise money, but they didn't have the funds to be able to do it on their own. So out of necessity, they actually had to pull resources to be able to do so. But one was, had a good list. Another one had like the logistics, and the other one had sort of the marketing prowess. So coming together, like understanding that and coming together, they're able to put on this fundraiser that was quite successful. So I think what's really, really important is listening and understanding what the other organizations' needs are, what they bring to the table, and what could work for them. And I think that's actually a theme throughout everything we've talked about tonight, today, is that we have to listen. I think we spend so much time talking. We may spend so much time making assumptions about things. We think we have every single answer, but you know what? It's not that hard to reach out to, like Anthony said, the donor, or to your employees, or to your, to other organizations out there, and try to figure out how we can work on this, work together. So that is what I would say is, if you're clear about what your unique value proposition is, then just because someone else another organization seems to do the same thing, doesn't necessarily mean that you're the same. So you may have, an expertise in, I don't know, tech, and the other one has, a great list or something. And so finding a way to make it a win-win. So it's not that you're trying to get something, but you're offering something, and you can work together to move forward. Because the reality is, with what's happened over the last 18 months, organizations have gone away and are going to continue to go away. Organizations are going to need to consolidate, and if not, if those who may not consolidate are going to have to figure out how to operate more efficiently, which means they may have to cut into a situation where they share services, like with seemingly competitors from the past.
Before I move on to the other questions of the queue, I want to pick up on this question of competitor. I feel sometimes when nonprofits are telling their story, they're telling it as a way to differentiate from their neighbor who's doing something complementary or similar. Are we really competing with each other in the nonprofit space, or are we competing with the rest of the noise, or all these other pieces, or what? Talk a little bit about this notion of competition among nonprofits and how that affects storytelling.
Well, the minute we all went online, you no longer are competing with the Y, or the whatever that equivalent is next door. You said there are 21 of them in the area. You're not competing with something in Calcutta, right? That is that you may not even realize I'm interested in donating to, but because maybe someone asked me, or because someone asked, just seemed interesting, I'm going to give to it. So you have to understand that it's not necessarily about, we have a similar looking outside box, or we have a similar way of communicating something, or offer similar services. It's that you have to understand what I'm going to be looking for when I've made my donation in a particular situation. That's one. Two is, even if we do similar things, so community center, a gym, and all that, there are ways that you can differentiate what you have to offer, right? I mean, and so it could be that, one could be low cost, right? So they're not going. It's going to be kind of like more no frills, but the other one may be a little bit more upscale, or may offer a little bit more, whatever it may be, more features and benefits. So you kind of also need to understand that, right? But ultimately, you have to understand, when you go online, it can be anywhere. And I'll give you an example. About a month ago, I made a donation to an organization in Cambodia. Not because I knew anything about the organization, but it was as a thank you because someone did a favor for me. And I asked her, what's her favorite organization? She said, please, that's it. And same way I've given to you the why, actually, Anthony, because my friend of mine was being honored by you.
Thank you.
Right. So you have to understand the situation where someone gives, and also the fact that when you're online, there are a lot of different opportunities for a person to give to.
Absolutely. Anthony, what would you add to this question of, is it a fixed size pie that we're dividing up among nonprofits, or can we grow the pie?
I think you can grow the pie. And I think that you need to see donors, I think, in a three-dimensional way and not just one-dimensionally. I think that when we get stuck as fundraisers, and I know that I'm guilty of this, you know, when you have the pressure of raising funds and you're working with major gift donors, you see donors in one very tight, specific way. They give to my college readiness program, so that's all I'm going to ever talk to them about is college readiness. And sometimes I do, you know, encourage fundraisers to say, hey, have you ever just decided, can I talk to you about other things? Can I talk, what else are you interested in? But I'm going to see where we might have some alignment. So that's one way. But the other way is to what Liz was exactly saying, is to see it in kind of from a broader perspective. So we have a college readiness program at the Y. There are some fantastic college readiness programs across the city. All of us can claim great accomplishments. We have 95% on-time graduation rate, 94% college matriculation rate, We're filling the talent pipeline. So from that, however, when you start to take your organization as a whole and what you can offer in terms of that ecosystem of youth development, then maybe that's where some differentiation starts. Yes, we do have a health component because we do have these gyms. We have an immigration component. So if any of our teens also happen to be families that are, come from new American families, we have services to provide there as well. And so I think you need to broaden your perspective in terms of how you reach your donors and what else that messaging can look like. To say, don't just see us from this way, but our youth programs have tentacles beyond just this one singular program. So
I love that. So as we wrap up here, I'm going to ask you to give your parting thoughts on two topics. So number one is summarize for us how to become a better storyteller technically, and then summarize for us how to become a better storyteller in terms of the community-centric fundraising. We got a couple of questions in the chat here that are looking for, like, tell me where to start. How do I become a better storyteller technically, and how do I become a better storyteller as a person? Liz, do you want to start?
Sure. Technically, I would say it's kind of technical, I suppose. I would say that you have to start with you. It's all about you. You have to understand, like, why you're doing what you're doing, why you are with the organization you're with, why is it that you buy into that mission? Because if you get clear about that, then it's easier for you to communicate with whoever you need to communicate with. So I think, like, technically, I would say you need to have that clarity to begin with. And I think a lot of times we may not necessarily have that. I also think for some people, they see this as a paycheck. And if you see this as a paycheck, it is a paycheck, but if that's all you see, then you can't really bring what's necessary to be able to differentiate what you're offering is to that prospective donor, to whatever audience you're communicating with. So I feel like it's getting that clarity for yourself first. The second thing is it's important that we own our narratives as organizations, and that we understand how to tell a story that really focuses on the impact we're making and on the, how that funder or that supporter can be a hero in supporting us in reaching that goal, right? Versus that poverty porn, that sort of focus on the problem, and that's really exploitative and is very like 1980. So I think that's something I want people to sort of avoid doing. And finally, I would say, if you're trying to be more community-centric, speak to the community. We don't, for some reason, we don't speak to people, right? We just kind of make a lot of assumptions about a lot of things, but speak to people. I told the group I'm working with in Ethiopia, I was like, you want to know what your members want? Have a town hall. And that's what they did. And there are a lot of things they discovered, like, wow, we never knew that, right? So I think it's that we need to be willing to listen. We always talk, we're always putting stuff out there, but just listen, because people will tell you a lot of stuff. That's what I've got.
I love that, because the key to better storytelling, better listening. I love it. Anthony?
Sure. Well, to answer those two questions, I'm actually going to reference two great strategic communicators. The first is on this panel, Liz and Gonzi. To be a better technical writer, I think it goes back to what Liz has been saying throughout this panel. I think of it from a journalistic standpoint, and because we live in an attention economy, I'm always thinking you're only going to get 2 seconds of somebody's attention. So don't bury the lead. Start with the lead, which is really the impact. Don't get into the whole, sometimes you don't have time to get into, well, this is what we do and this is how we do it and blah, 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 blah. Go straight for what the impact it is that you're trying to achieve, because that might just generate a lot of greater interest. So if you think about it from the journalistic standpoint, it's the inverse triangle, right? Where it's like the big headline at the top and then all the minor details flow after that. So that's just one piece of advice in terms of the technical side. The community-centric side, I'll summon another great communicator, but Liz also has expressed this throughout the panel, but Simon Sinek, if you know him, and his book Start With Why. And if you haven't seen his TED Talk, look at that TED Talk. It is brilliant when Absolutely. He talks about, there's a couple of things that he said in his talk, right? That he says, all organizations and individuals know what they do. Some know how they do what they do, but very few know why they do what they do. And he actually said, you don't want to do business with everybody. You want to do business with the people who believe what you believe. And so, to Liz's point, in terms of talking to the people, you got to find your people, right? And sometimes the way to do that is to talk to understand what people are interested in, whether or not there's alignment with your mission. I think that's a powerful way of looking at it. Start with why and do business with the people that have alignment and that believe in what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Anthony. And Mayma, I'm so glad that your technical difficulties have allowed you to come back and join us and just give us one last piece of parting words, parting advice. I know we're at time, but would love to give you a chance to say a word.
I would say that I always believe in, again, the power of one. I feel like people don't often know that what they have to say is important. I certainly didn't know when I began my journey. Again, I thought, I'm just one person. I don't know how to do this. I have no fundraising experience, how to build a board. And, if you have passion and you tell your story and you speak from the heart, it's all you really need, right? Speak your truth, speak it boldly, speak it proudly, and just keep refining yourself, keep refining who you are. Tiger Lily now, we have volunteers all across the country. We've grown from me beginning in bed in treatment and chemotherapy, being one person, to now one of the premier national breast cancer organizations and growing globally, women's health orgs, because I told the same story. I told the true story. And the more I began to be authentic, I told the vulnerability of what I was going through. People felt that. And so I tell my patients, this is not just about winning a battle or war. This story is about what happens to the ordinary girl who's in college, who's planning her dreams, who just got married, just bought a new dog, got a new job, and something happens to her. So how do you just speak your truth? And the beauty in telling a story is that you could change someone's life, right? You could change your story and change healthcare policy. You could help someone get the right kind of screening or whatever you're doing, whether it's with a Y or diabetes or Alzheimer's. Use your power of one to make an impact, and never underestimate the reason why you're on this earth. You each are born with one unique gift to give the world. What is that gift? And don't be afraid to try new things, open your mind, speak your truth, and use your privilege for power by doing that, just exactly that.
Well, I can think of no better place to end. I want to thank each of you for sharing your stories, your advice, your practical tips. I sure learned from all of you, and I know that the audience did as well. Audience, I want to remind you that this is the first of 3 webinars in the series. Our next conversation will be similar, but focused on how to lead fundraising teams during this continued challenging time. And the third one will be about engaging boards in philanthropy and how do we start to put some better practices in place based on everything we've learned in the last 18 months. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the extra 4 minutes. Much appreciated. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.